before we get back into where we're holding, in last class we skipped note 55, a little oversight. So let's just read that quickly, and then we'll jump back into where we're in the middle of chapter 9. So note 55 is on the topic where we talked about Torah, that it's from Torah. When we learn Torah, there's pleasure in Torah. Then you have that pleasure that you have in the Torah, you bring into mitzvahs as well. So in Torah you had the pleasure of learning Torah and the bittul, recognizing that it's the Eibishter's Torah, that really you understand it only because of the Eibishter is not being limited and confined in any way, shape, or form. That's why you can understand it. So you have the pleasure, the geshmak in understanding, and you have the bittul. And then translates into mitzvahs, that when you do mitzvahs, by mitzvahs, it's the other way around. The main thing is the obedience, right? But we also have to do it, we have to find pleasure even in the obedience in the Kabbalah. So where do we get that from? That comes from Torah. So in note 55, let's just look at note 55. The Rebbe just explains a little nuance in Tanya. In Tanya and Perek Mem Aleph. So in chapter 41 in Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe talks about here, and the Alter Rebbe talks about Kabbalah's oil, the importance of Kabbalah's oil, of obedience. And the Alter Rebbe says over there, about Torah Amra Vavatam Yisrael Elikechem, that the Torah says that you have to serve Hashem. So he's talking over there about service. Service is obedience. You have to serve Hashem obediently, and yet what does Alter Rebbe say? He says, "Va'Torah Amra." The Torah says that you have to serve Hashem. So usually in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says, "K'mei shekasuv, k'mei shenemar," right? K'deksiv, whatever. There's a different terminology. Here, the Alter Rebbe says the Torah says. Why? So the Rebbe says because that's telling us, it's emphasizing this point that where do you get the geshmak, the pleasure in avodah? That comes from the Torah. The Torah Amra comes from Torah. Yes, it says that the fact that Al Rebbe is alluding to this idea, that's why he changes up the way he quotes a pasuk here and says that the Torah says, because when a person serves Hashem obediently, the avodah of evet, and why does he do it? Because that's what the Torah tells him to do. So nimshach me'ena tainug, the Torah gam avodah, that draws the pleasure, something like the pleasure that he has in Limud Torah and study of Torah, in his intellectual comprehension and pursuits, brings that into his service. Okay, so that's note 55 as a geshmak, a little diuk in Tanya and Perek Mem Aleph, based on what we said here. Okay, so now we're in the second paragraph of chapter 9, and what we said here in the first paragraph of chapter 9, we talked about Eved Knaini, Eved Ivri, and Ama Ivriya, that there is the non-Jewish servant, there's the Jewish servant, and then there's the Jewish maidservant. And we said that these three correspond to Tzaddik, Rasha, and Beinoni. The three categories of people. And we explained that when we talk about, so if you had to fit them into categories, right? You have three categories with three categories of servant and three categories of people, right? So there's Eved Knaini, Eved Ivri, Ama Ivriya, and then you have Tzaddik, Rasha, Beinoni. So where do you fit them? Where would you place each one of these three? So seemingly you'd put let's start from the bottom. Let's go these way in the process of elimination, right? So you'd have the Rasha would be Eved Knaini, right? The Beinoni would be Eved Ivri, and the Tzaddik would be Ama Ivri. Or if we don't know anything about it, we'd flip those around. But that's where we'd put the Beinoni, the Rasha into Eved Knaini. So the Rebbe says here, based on a Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, that when we say the Rasha and the Beinoni are included in one category, the category of Eved Ivri, of the Jewish servant. Why? Because what's an Eved? What's the Eved Knaini? Eved Knaini is somebody who's Avda Befker Nichale, somebody who would rather be, he'd rather do his own thing and not have any kind of service. It's just that because he has that's what he wants. The Eved Ivri has already a little bit of a geshmak in his service, right? There's a little bit of a pleasure. That's basically what he said. But the Rasha and the Beinoni are both, you have like this. You have the higher end Rasha and the lower end of the Beinoni. The higher end of Rasha is somebody who commits sin. So if he commits a sin, that's why we call him a Rasha. So you would think that if he commits a sin, so then he's no longer a servant. A servant is somebody who's faithful to his master. So he said, no, even a servant, it's possible sometimes that he might slip up, right? But the question is, what's the reaction to it? So if he recognizes that he's really that he betrayed his master and he feels bad about it, so then that proves that illustrates the idea that he is a servant. If he's not a servant to his master, then why would he feel bad about betraying him? Right? If he's not beholden to him. So the fact that a Rasha would feel bad, it says that Rishoyim is Meleim Charata, that the Rishoyim are full of regret. The fact that there's a Rasha that's full of regret means that really he knows he should be doing better. He should be accountable. He should be in line to serve his master. So here it's already somebody who, on the one hand, he has Avda Befker Nichle, he has his own things. It's just that he serves his master because he's an Evet, because he's a servant. But the fact that we still call him a servant, because the fact that when he slips up, he feels bad about it, that shows that he really feels beholden and committed to his master. That's the Rasha that fits into Eved Ivri. Then you have the Beinani, the lower end Beinani. Here's somebody already who doesn't commit any sin, right? So the Beinani doesn't commit any sin, and yet what we say that the Beinani is still an Eved Ivri. Why? Why is the Beinani an Eved? Because the Beinani, even though he has perfect control over himself, he doesn't slip up, yet he still has pleasure in other things. His pleasure is not solely directed towards his master. His pleasure is in his own interests, his own desires, his own. It's just that the idea that he stays in line is because of Hakas Hashevet, right? Remember we talked about this idea of Hakas Hashevet, that Eved stays in line because he's afraid of, right? So, I'm sorry, this is all Eved Kanani, I'm sorry, I said Eved Ivri. This is on the level of Eved Kanani. That in Eved Kanani you have the Rasha and the higher end Rasha and the lower end Beinani, I'm sorry. That there's no gishmak, right? There is no pleasure. It's Avda Befkeri Nichalei. And so, but how do you have the lower level Beinani in that category of Eved Kanani? Is because the Beinani is somebody who has his own interests. It's just that he's overwhelmed. So just as in the case of an Eved Kanani. Why does an Eved Kanani stay in line? Because he's afraid of retribution. He's afraid of punishment. It's the same is true with regard to the Rasha, at the higher end Rasha, and the lower end Beinani, that he's also afraid of the Shevet, of the staff. What does that mean he's afraid of the staff? So we explained that he has a neshama. The neshama is makeh. It hits him. The neshama is what presses on him. His own neshama somehow affects him in some kind of a way that it keeps him in line. He recognizes that he's a servant. Right, so really he'd rather do his own thing. So the Rasha is somebody who on occasion falls, he slips up, but then he right away regrets it because he's an Evet. The Beinani is somebody who doesn't fall. Why? Because the impact that his neshama has on him is so great that it's not possible for him to ever slip up. But internally, he's like the Rasha in that internally he wants his pleasure, his passions, and his interests lie elsewhere. Okay? Then you have Eved Ivri. What's Eved Ivri? Somebody who's already has a pleasure in serving his master. That's already the higher end of the Beinani. The Beinani whose interests are in higher pursuits. We know that in Tanya, that Rebbe talks about the Beinani, and even though he doesn't discuss it like really explicitly, but it's clear that there's a whole spectrum of Beinani. It starts with the idea of the Beinani, somebody who has perfect control over himself, right? He has perfect control. And yet, then he goes on to talk about Ava and Yira, and you have to have Ava, right? And different types of Ava that a person has to have. So we start by saying that a person who's a Beinani can't really ever hope to have full Ava and Yira of Hashem. But then he goes on to say that you have to have Ava. So what are we talking about? We're talking about already a Beinani that is graduating, that's going higher, where now he has his love and his interests and his passions are in serving Hashem. There is an enthusiasm, there is an excitement, there is a passion there. There is a love. So that already is the Eved Ivri. It's somebody who's already more interested, more excited in serving Hashem. Right? So that's the higher end of Beinani. Then you have the Amma Ivriya. The Amma Ivriya is the tzaddik. That's the level of the tzaddik. How so? So he glosses over it here really. He doesn't really explain it here. But the thing is like this. So the Alter Rebbe explains it like this. You have an Eved Ivri, Eved and a Amma Ivriya. There's the male servant and you have the female servant. What are the different roles that they have in the home of the master? So the Eved, his role is that he goes out. He has to go to the marketplace, he has to go buy material, he has to go buy food, and he has to bring it home. The Amma Ivriya, the maidservant, works inside, right? She works in the house. She doesn't go out in the street. It's not befitting for her to be out in the street. She's in the house. So what's the difference? The Eved Ivri brings home raw material, raw ingredients. He brings home wheat, he brings home flour, he brings home raw meat. The Amma Ivriya is the one who takes it and cooks it and prepares it for a meal. So when the servant comes home, what he brings home is not fit to be put on the table. It's not fit to be served to the master. It's the Amma Ivriya who makes it fit to be served, who puts it on the table. Similarly, when you have the tzaddik and the Beinani, you have that same idea, that the Beinani can only break himself. He's still dealing with unholiness, with ugliness. He's still dealing with unholy, with sinful desire or pleasures and interests, and he has to break himself. That behavior is something that is far away from godliness, to engage with that lower, with the unholy. The Amma Ivriya, that's the tzaddik. The tzaddik is somebody his whole experience is in serving Hashem. His whole experience is transformation, taking something and making it holy. So he only deals with godliness. He only comes in contact with the holy. Even the unholy, if he comes in contact, as we're going to learn soon, it's on a different level. It's not the same as by the Beinoni. So therefore we have like this. So we have the Eved Knani, that is the higher end Rasha and the lower end Beinoni. You have the Eved Ivri, which is the higher Beinoni, and then you have the Amma Ivriya, which is the Tzaddik, right? All this is to explain, we're working towards understanding why our parsha begins with the laws of Eved Ivri and not Eved Knani. So we've established that you have to, and we already know where we're going, right? Because we've established, based on the whole lengthy introduction we gave about learning Torah, that the whole point is that a person has to serve Hashem, that even in service there has to be pleasure, there has to be enjoyment. So now we know already, we see how we're working towards it, that the Eved Knani already is somebody who doesn't have joy. There's no joy in his service. So that's not the ultimate ideal. Yes, you can even be a Beinoni and be an Eved Knani, but that's not the ultimate form of serving Hashem. There has to be pleasure. So that's why we open with that. So let's get into it.
What makes the Eved Knani come back to his service?
So we said the fact that in the metaphor it's the Hakas Hashevet. So that's what we said. In the metaphor it's a physical fear. The slave is worried about being abused, right? Being punished, being whipped. In the analog by the Beinoni, or even by the Rasha, it's not that he's not worried about fear. What keeps him in line is not Gehenna, the fear of Gehenna, or the fear of retribution, or the fear of punishment. What keeps him in line is that he has a neshama. So Shevet is a level of neshama. The Hakas Shevet is that the neshama is also the terminology that the Hakas Shevet, that the whip, right, the hitting of the staff. So that implies also that it's not something that's like really internalized within him. It's something that comes sort of from outside. It's external. It's like the part of the neshama that's not internalized within him. It's part of the neshama that's beyond him. So it sends some kind of a subconscious message to him that bothers him. A yid, if he engages in something that he shouldn't be engaged in, he feels bad. Why? If a person finds himself doing something that he shouldn't be doing, then clearly he doesn't have full awareness of his connection with Hashem. So why is he doing what? So that's why he's doing it. Then why does he feel bad? Where does that feeling come from? So forget about the idea of the Alter Rebbe talks about Tani, the guilt, which we said is not the Jewish thing, right? Because that comes from the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara makes you feel guilty. We're not talking about that kind of guilt. The fact that a Yid knows that this is inappropriate for him.
It's the same for the Beinoni.
Where does that come from? Yes. It's just that the Beinoni, the impact is greater that he doesn't engage in it to begin with. He wants it, but he doesn't actually go ahead and do it because that awareness is much stronger for him. Right? Okay. So now we're the second paragraph of chapter 9 on top of page Chaf Hey in our copies here. Okay. So we're going to see here, we're going to see Sir Halavai Tzaddik. Let's see, let's go. Now we can understand why Parshas Mishpatim, which we said is starting us off, giving us a general message in how we're supposed to serve Hashem, begins with the laws of the Eved Ivri and the Amma Ivriya. Kisikna Eved Ivri Gomer v'chim kar ish es bitei la Amma Gomer. Right? The first parsha in Parshas Mishpatim is Kisikna Eved Ivri, when you're to acquire Eved Ivri. The second parsha in Parshas Mishpatim is Amma Ivriya. Chim kar ish es bitei la Amma. Selling a person who sells his daughter. It's better to not translate these terms, right? Just leave it in the untranslated. Doesn't feel as difficult. Okay, so ve'inyan Eved Kanaini ba parsha shemedabrim b'kinyane Eved lo yisei tziketei savadim u'rak moy b'derech agav u'ba'ifin shlili. So in where does Eved Kanaini appear in Parshas Mishpatim in the beginning? In these first two opening parshas of Mishpatim, first two paragraphs of Mishpatim, is by the Amma Ivri. It says lo yisei tziketei savadim. It says you shouldn't go out the way slaves go out, because there are certain laws that govern how a slave can be emancipated if the master harms him and he loses a tooth, he loses an aver. So it says by Amma Ivriya, and also the same is true by Eved Ivri, that it's lo yisei tziketei savadim. So the parsha opens ki yimkar ish, right, is bitei la'ama, or beforehand ki sikna Eved Ivri. We're talking about acquiring a slave, a servant, a bondsman. We've dug the hole too deep already. It's okay. That's what we're talking about. And it doesn't talk about the laws of acquiring a Eved Kanaini. The only way Eved Kanani is mentioned here is only in passing. That when we're talking about the laws of the Eved Ivri and the Amma Ivriya, the laws of Eved Kanani don't apply here. So A, the Eved Kanani is mentioned parenthetically, and B, mentioned the negative. How the Eved Ivri and the Amma Ivri should not go, right? That the other laws differ from that one. So it's only mentioned in passing, right? Why is that? Why don't we start? So we had asked, remember, if the whole emphasis here is that even when it comes to rational laws, we have to, the thing is we have to strive to do it with obedience. We have to recognize that even though we understand it, but our service of Hashem is not limited to our understanding, we have to do it with Kabbalah soil, with obedience. So if so, start with Eved Kanani, which is the ultimate form of obedience. So he says, no, we don't start with that. Why? That because our parsha here, which comes right on after the parsha of Har Sinai, so we're talking about right after Matan Torah. We're starting out now talking about the general service of a person, how he's supposed to serve Hashem. So it has to be. Why do we open then with the laws of servants altogether? It's because the general idea is that the way a person has to serve Hashem is like an eved, a servant. And since, as we explained, how are we supposed to serve Hashem? That form of servitude has to be with pleasure and enthusiasm. Therefore, he starts by talking about Eved Ivri and Amma Ivriya, because the Eved Kanani, as we explained earlier in the paragraph of the chapter, we said that Eved Kanani has no pleasure. He is Avda Befkenichli. His pleasure is elsewhere. His pleasure is not at all in serving Hashem. Right? He only stays in line because his neshama is compelling him to stay in line. But really, he has no pleasure in it, and even when he's engaged in it, there's no pleasure. That's not the way we're supposed to serve Hashem. We're supposed to serve Hashem taka like an Eved, obedience, but with pleasure. There has to be excitement. There has to be enthusiasm. And so therefore, it starts first with Eved Ivri, and then with the Amma Ivriya. Right? Why that way? Because first we start by Eved Ivri, which is Madreges HaBeinani, as we explained before. We start with the service that is HaBeinani. Why do you open with the Beinani? If we're going to talk about the ideal, start right away from the Tzaddik. He says no, because Midas HaBeinani is Midas Kol Adam, V'achar Kol Adam Yumshach. That's like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, what's the expected of us to be a Beinani? Right? And that is Midas Kol Adam. Everybody can achieve that form of service of Hashem as a Beinani. So that's where we start with. Start with Beinani. That's the goal. But then, if so why do you continue with Amma Ivriya? If we can't reach Tzaddik, what's the point of bringing in the Tzaddik? Right? So he says like this. Then he introduces the Amma Ivriya, which is the level of Tzaddik. We know from Tanya that the person can't hope to be a Tzaddik. The whole thing is, like you said, Halavai Beinani, our service is, Midas Kol Adam is the Midah of the Beinani. That's where we could be as a Beinani. So why mention Tzaddik when we're talking in general about serving Hashem? So the Rebbe says, because Shagam Avodah Sheikh is Chol Echad. Because even the service of a Tzaddik is also applicable to everybody. How so? The Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya that even when a person knows that he won't reach the true level of tzaddik, he can never hope to be a tzaddik, as is defined in Tanya. Mikol Makim Hu Yases Shaloi L'Kayim Es Hashvua Mashav Shbin Osid Tzaddik. Right? The Alter Rebbe talks in Tanya about this. Tanya really opens with Mashbin Osid Tzaddik. Tanya opens with the oath that's administered to a neshama before it comes down to this world, the Gemara in Nida, that you're given an oath to swear that you're going to be a tzaddik. Then the Alter Rebbe explains that you can't be a tzaddik. So that only reinforces the question. If you can't be a tzaddik, so why are you given an oath to be a tzaddik? So the Alter Rebbe explains the point is that tzaddik is the ultimate goal that the person has to work towards. So even though a person can't reach the ultimate level of tzaddik, but you have to pursue it. First of all, you have to just know which way is up and which way is down. If you don't know where's up, then which way are you going even as a Beinani? So fine, so that you have to reach up. But beyond that, Alter Rebbe explains that really there are elements of the tzaddik's avodah that a person can apply to himself. Right? In a sense, we know that the tzaddik, we say, is tzaddik is somebody who's mos b'ra. Tzaddik despises evil. So anything that's a sin, the Torah says, don't do this, the tzaddik is disgusted by it. Right? A Beinani knows, we just explained about a Beinani, that a Beinani doesn't have. Beinani also has his own pleasures. A Beinani finds pleasure in the sinful, right? He could see the pleasures of this world. He doesn't have this feeling of disgust to things that Hashem finds repulsive. And yet, even a Beinani has to work on himself to be like the tzaddik, that there have to be some things that on some level we're disgusted by. There have to be some sins that we know this is totally inappropriate for me. Even there, you're not ultimately like the tzaddik, because the tzaddik, it's truly he finds it abhorrent, he finds it disgusting, to the extent that he can never do it. With us, somebody might be able to convince you, with a non-tzaddik, you can be convinced maybe that it's not so disgusting. But still, there have to be certain things that are off limits to us, that aren't even a challenge for us. They're not a challenge. Why? Because they're totally inappropriate. And you recognize that. So that's sort of similar to the tzaddik's avodah. So the Alter Rebbe talks about the idea that we're administered an oath to be a tzaddik because there's an element of the avodah of the tzaddik that we do have to aspire to, that we do have to implement in our lives. Right? In order to fulfill that shavua, that oath of the tzaddik. Okay. So if you're shleimar, so now the question becomes, if we just explained that now we said, what the question was, if we're talking about servitude, if we're talking about obedience, to start with Evet Kanani, the ultimate form of servitude. So we said, no, it has to be chayis and tainuk. There has to be pleasure in our servitude. So therefore we open with Evet Ivriya and Amma Ivriya, the level of Bein and the level of Tzaddik. So if so, then why mention Evet Kanani at all? We said right in the beginning here of the paragraph that the Evet Kanani is mentioned in passing. So why have the Evet Kanani at all mentioned here, even if it's in passing, even in the negative, right? So the Rebbe says, why do we mention him? We come back around. Why? Because humitzad hamayl diskafia. Because there's also an advantage to iskafia. So you have, in serving Hashem, there's iskafia and there's ishapcha. Ishapcha, we said, which is the avodah of tzaddikim, is transformation, right? Where you take the unholy, you turn it into something holy. It's transformed. So you're not dealing with unholiness, or you're no longer dealing with holiness, you're dealing with something that's holy, that's been totally transformed into holiness. Then you have iskafia. Iskafia is when you break the unholiness, when you overcome a temptation, a desire. So the desire for something inappropriate, for something sinful, is at full force, right? And you don't give in to that desire. So what happens? In a sense, you break the power, the force, the energy of that desire. The desire is still there. The person is still struggling with things that he shouldn't be struggling with. In other words, his battlefield is very far away from godliness. The fact that Hashem says this is disgusting and the person's drawn to it and desires it so strongly, that means that he's all the way at the outskirts of his service of Hashem, right? You're far away from where he should be. And yet he breaks it. But there's an advantage there too. As Alter Rebbe discusses in this mimer that we quoted before about the Tzaddik Rosh Beini and the Evet Ivri, and the Evet Kanani, that even the Tzaddik also has to have this Evet Kanani. In other words, Alter Rebbe divides and says Evet Kanani is Rosh and Beini, Evet Ivri is a Beini, and Amma Ivriya is a Tzaddik. And then he says, really, they all have to have, all the elements have to be combined. That even the Amma Ivriya, the Tzaddik, has to also have an element, has to have the Evet Kanani, has to have this idea of Iskafia. Why? Shagam b'tzadik gomor tzricha liyas avodah Evet Kanani. Tzaddik, even a complete tzaddik, the highest level of tzaddik, has to have a service that emulates, it's similar to the Evet Kanani. Mitzad hamayla sheb iskafia, because the advantage that there is to iskafia. This is what Chazal say, Al Yemar Adam Ef Shichulu El Efshi. We quoted this medrash we quoted earlier in a slightly different context. This idea that a person has to say Efshi Uma Esa Shavi B'Shamayim Gazer Alai. Right? That a person shouldn't say I don't want to commit the sin. He has to say I want to commit the sin. What should I do? God doesn't allow me to commit the sin. So what are we talking about? So ultimately, what comes out, we're talking about a person who really doesn't want to do the sin. Right? It talks about the difference in tzaddik and about tshuva. Somebody who's been there and done that, he shouldn't say I want to. He should say I don't want to. Right? Because he has to stay distant from his past behavior. But a tzaddik, somebody who's never committed a sin, doesn't know even what it is, he has to say I want to. But what should I do? God doesn't allow me to. Because he's not running the risk. He's not vulnerable to doing it because he doesn't desire it. But what does that mean? If he doesn't desire it, so why does he say I want to? If he's saying I want to, is meaningless. He doesn't want to. What does it mean he wants to? Okay, so let's figure that out. Before we get to explaining it, why does he say that? Why does he have to say? Why does the tzaddik have to say, I want to commit this? The tzaddik, we just said, doesn't want to commit sin. He's disgusted by sin. So why did Chazal tell us that he should say, I want to commit a sin? He should say that because then you have the ma'ila of iskafia. Then he has he wants to do something, he has a desire to do something that is wrong, and he doesn't do it. So now he also has this idea of breaking that will for a sin. On his own, without saying Efshi, he doesn't have a desire for sin. So there's no way he can ever break himself to do anything, because there's no breaking involved. All he has to do is he just wants to serve Hashem. So is it a bit of a mind game? You're not fooled. You're not buying the tzaddik's Efshi.
I mean, we're intrigued, but we're not fooled.
Okay, so let's continue. Chapter 10. Let's see if the Rebbe explains it. Well, The biskafia zu hurak hamayla diskafia. The Rebbe is going to explain now what this means. What does it mean that the tzaddik says? Okay, so we said like this. We said that you have the avodah, ultimate avodah is eved ivri and ama ivriya. Why then do we introduce the eved knaini? Why is he even mentioned even in passive and even in the negative? Why is he mentioned in this conversation if we're talking about serving Hashem and we're saying the proper way to serve Hashem is eved ivri and ama ivriya? Because there is a role that the eved knaini form of service plays in our service of Hashem that we can't completely ignore it. It has to be part of our service. What is that? Iskafia. To the extent that even the tzaddik and the tzaddik gomer, he says, even the highest level of tzaddik also has to have a form of serving Hashem as an eved ivri, which is iskafia. How does it happen by the tzaddik gomer? Because he says efshi. He has to say, he wants to commit a sin, but he doesn't because God doesn't allow him to. What does this mean? It seems lip service. How does he get to iskafia because of this? It just seems to be covering all his bases, but is there substance to it, right, to his statement? So he explains like this, chapter 10. When we're talking about this iskafia, that's by the tzaddik, where the tzaddik says efshi, he wants to commit the sin, but he's prevented from Hashem, by Hashem, so he has the benefit of iskafia. See, in iskafia you have two things. You have a mile and you have a chazon. There's the benefit and then there's the negative of the iskafia, of iskafia. What is it? We said before. Somebody who has to have iskafia has to break himself, has to break his will. He desires to commit a sin, and he breaks his will and he doesn't commit the sin. So you have the negative is, this is somebody who's dealing with temptation for sin. So that's obviously somebody who's distant from the ideal, right? The ideal person is somebody who's completely, his whole life and internal pleasures and desires are completely in sync with God. So if God desires good and doesn't desire evil, so then this person, if he's in line with that, should desire only what God desires and not desire anything he doesn't. So the fact that he's struggling with temptation for something that's not that God doesn't want shows the negative side of it, which is he's far from God. He's far from being completely in sync and in tune with God. On the other hand, there's a benefit in that there's a iskafia. He can break the unholy, as we're going to see soon what that benefit looks like. So here we're saying that by the tzaddik, by the eved knaini, he's got the good and the bad. Come with it. Eved knaini, somebody who overcomes his temptation. There's the good and the bad. The good is he overcomes his temptation. The bad is that he has temptation. But by the tzaddik, when the tzaddik has this iskafia, when he says efshi, he says I desire it. Here he only has the good, not the bad. How does that work? That's the negative. The downside of iskafia is that when a person says he wants, it shows that he's far from godliness. Why is the tzaddik saying he wants it? Not because he really wants it, but because the Torah is telling him to say he wants it. Because he learned the medrash that says that he has to say efshi. So that's why he's saying efshi. This is why it's not lip service. You see what the Rebbe says. He asked about why he's just saying it. He doesn't mean it. So the Rebbe says, what's the point of him saying efshi? By saying he wants it, he's actually starting to stir up some kind of a desire for it. Yeah, true on its own, without saying it, he wouldn't have that desire. He doesn't have that desire. But by saying he wants it, somehow he's drumming up some kind of a desire for something that he shouldn't want. But why is he doing that? Only so that he can then go ahead and do against that desire. He's creating a desire for something he shouldn't want, so that he could then go ahead and negate it, right? Let's look at the footnotes here. In 68, right, he says, when a person says efshi, he wants it, that shows that he's far distant from Elikus, right? The fact that, so he explains that when a person says, that by iskafia, it shows that he's distant from godliness. A tzaddik never comes really in contact with unholy. He's living his life in a totally spiritual reality. He's distant from engaging in there's a story, I think I've told this before. It's like a Gishmaka story, I think. It's other ramifications, but they tell the story about Avramel Axelrod. Avramel Axelrod was from Lubavitch. It's from the first time, I think. He had come to the United States way early. He'd come in the times of Rebbe Rashab. He was a Rav in Baltimore. He was the Chassidish Rav in Baltimore. And he was a Yid who was living in Baltimore already in the early 1900s. And he looked like a chassid. He had his hat with his beard, the whole thing. Anyway, he used to wear an oversized yarmulke. So people used to ask him, why do you wear such a big yarmulke? Put on a normal size yarmulke. Why do you have to wear such a ridiculous looking yarmulke? So he says, if I wear a smaller yarmulke, he says like this, when I wake up in the morning, I put on my big yarmulke, right? And my Yetzer Hara says, Avramelia, why do you have to wear such a ridiculous yarmulke? Put on a smaller one. He says, but what happens if I put on a smaller yarmulke? It's going to say, why do you have to wear yarmulke? Take it off. He says, I'd rather fight with my Yetzer Hara about big or small than yes, yarmulke or no yarmulke, right? The tzaddik and he doesn't even have any struggle, but were he to have a struggle, it would all be about the size of his yarmulke. There's nothing to do with wearing one or not wearing one. He doesn't have that he's not on that edge, right? So then how does he ever come in contact with Sitra Achra, with the other side, with the temptation for something? He doesn't, right? So the fact that he's saying that there's a skafia, that there's a mila in a skafia, and that you're engaging with the other side, with unholy, right? And then he continues that by the tzaddik, why does he then say that he wants it? So that he can create some kind of a desire for it. Note 69. If the Torah is telling you have to say you want it, so then you have to really want it. So when he's saying it, he has to really mean it, which means that he has to really stir up some kind of a desire for something that he shouldn't want. But why is he doing it? Only so he can go against it. So the fact that by the tzaddik, he's not doing this because he desires it, right? But this is his pleasure. What did we say the difference between the tzaddik and the other levels are? Is that the tzaddik, his pleasure is in serving Hashem. That's what separates him from everybody else. That's also his problem. His problem is that he only has pleasure, right? So he doesn't deal with the skafia. So what happens then? If we're going to introduce a skafia into his service, that skafia is also going to have pleasure, because that's how he serves Hashem. Even though on the one hand it's true skafia because he's saying it and he's meaning it, the fact that he's saying he wants it means that he's actually creating a desire for something that he shouldn't desire. It's just that he's forcing himself and going against that desire. This itself is his pleasure. In other words, by somebody who actually has to have a skafia because he's dealing with sin, temptation for sin, when he breaks himself, there's no pleasure there. He has to really muster up strength to overcome. So his pleasure is elsewhere, and he's going to overcome. He's going to hold himself back from indulging in that pleasure, right? That's the iskafia. But by the tzaddik, the whole reason he's having to go against the desire, he's creating a desire, so he should go against it. So where's the pleasure? In the desire or in the going against the desire?
It's in meeting the obligation to have the desire.
But why does he have that desire? So he can not fulfill it. So where's the pleasure? The pleasure is in not giving into the temptation. By somebody who has temptation, the pleasure is the temptation. He just has to overcome that pleasure and go against his desire, go against his pleasure. But by the tzaddik, the whole reason he has that desire in the first place is so he should overcome it. So where's the pleasure? In the desire or in the going against the desire? The pleasure is in going against it. So therefore he has the advantage of his skafia in that he's breaking a desire, but he doesn't have the negative because where's his pleasure? Not in the unholy, but in the holy, in the doing God's will. Because the whole point of having that desire is to go against it. We have time to continue? 2 minutes? Well, I don't know if we're going to have time to get through the paragraph. Okay, so v'hine yedua till now we said that the tzaddik also has to have his skafia. There has to be, he only has his hapcha, he doesn't have his skafia. So he's lacking, his avodah is not all-inclusive. Right? How does a tzaddik get to his skafia if he's never going to engage, he's never going to come in contact with the unholy? So that's where the Chazal tell us, he has to say, that the tzaddik has to say he desires it. By saying he desires it, he creates some kind of desire for it, and then he overcomes that desire, he goes against it. Why is it the benefit of his skafia, not the negative? Because he has the benefit because he's actually going against the desire that he now has for something that he shouldn't desire. Why does he not have the negative? Because the negative side of it is that a person's pleasure is in the desire. Here, the tzaddik, his pleasure isn't in the desire itself, it's in going against the desire. So he has the pleasure in going against the desire, but he also has the desire, so he's got the best of both worlds. But why even bother having iskafia? What's the benefit of iskafia altogether? Iskafia seems to really have mostly a downside. What's the positive of it? So he says, so that's what continues, that there's a specific advantage to having iskafia over his hapcha. Kemaimer, like the quote in the Zohar that says, right, that when a person breaks the unholy, so then istalik yikar the kuch b'ruch b'cholamin. What's istalik yikar the kuch b'ruch b'cholamin? Seemingly simple meaning of that phrase should be that godliness retreats. Histalkos, it retreats. When a person's dealing with Sitra Achra, you have unholiness, so then that godliness would retreat. But that's, the Kabbalah tells us, and the Rebbe explains the Tanya, and we know famously from the Maimer, the first Basi Lagani, the Rebbe explains the opposite. Why do we say istalik? That when a person breaks the unholy, so then that brings about a higher revelation of godliness in the world. There's a greater revelation of godliness in the world as a result of breaking the unholy. And why is it called it istalik? Istalik seems to say it retreats. Why are we using that terminology? So he explains because what we're talking about a level of godliness that naturally is too high for this world. So therefore we call it siluk. We call it the retreat because it's beyond this world. So it on its own is removed from this world. And it's specifically that level that's removed from this world that is revealed in the world when a person breaks the unholy through iskafia. Okay, let's. I don't think we're going to have time to finish this paragraph. We'll continue it next class.